The flicker nobody took seriously. The first flicker happened at 2:13 in the morning. Not a blackout. Not even enough for most people to notice. Just a half-second pulse that rolled through the west side of Belmere like a skipped heartbeat. Inside Nora's diner, the neon beer sign above the pie fridge dimmed and came back buzzing louder than before. The old chest freezer near the kitchen gave a strained metallic groan. Somewhere behind the walls, silverware rattled faintly. Martin Velez looked up from beneath the counter before anyone else reacted. He stayed still for a second, listening. Rain tapped against the front windows. Trucks hissed down the highway outside. Coffee steamed from forgotten mugs near the register. And underneath all of it, that hum. Low, uneven, wrong. "You hear that?" Martin asked quietly. Nora barely looked over from the grill. "Hear what?" Martin slid himself out from under the counter slowly, knees cracking. At 58, every crouch came with a negotiation afterward. He brushed dust from his work shirt and tilted his head toward the freezer compressors lining the back wall. The hum shifted again, a vibration inside the electrical current itself. Most people never noticed those things. Even younger electricians usually depended on diagnostic tablets now. Plug in the reader, wait for the graph, replace whatever the screen blamed. Martin trusted sound first, always had. The overhead lights flickered once more, then steadied. Nora sighed. Power company's been screwing around all week. Martin walked toward the freezer. The kitchen smelled like frying onions and bleach. Rainwater dripped from the cuffs of his jacket onto the cracked tile floor. He placed one rough hand against the metal side panel. Warm. Too warm. How long's it been doing this? Couple days, maybe. And you waited till midnight to call? You answer at midnight. Fair enough. Martin crouched beside the unit and removed the access panel with a worn screwdriver from his back pocket. The compressor kicked hard beneath his fingertips, not cycling normally, straining. Outside, thunder rolled somewhere far beyond the river. Nora leaned against the counter watching him. "You think it's the freezer?" Martin didn't answer immediately, because he wasn't listening to the freezer anymore. He was listening to the building, the current moving through it. A subtle pulse passed through the wiring again, almost like distant machinery falling out of rhythm. His stomach tightened. He knew that sound, not exactly the sound itself, the feeling behind it. 26 years vanished for half a second. Smoke, blue sparks, his brother shouting over the alarm sirens, then darkness. Martin blinked hard and focused back on the compressor. "You okay?" Nora asked. "Yeah," but his voice came out thinner than he intended. He swapped the relay switch, tightened two loose connections, then stood carefully, rubbing his shoulder. Old injury. Damp weather always woke it up. The lights held steady now, at least for the moment. Nora poured him coffee without asking. "You look tired." Martin gave a small shrug. "Everybody looks tired lately." She slid the mug across the counter. "You still working over by Halston Avenue?" "Mostly. Heard 3 houses lost power over there yesterday. Transformer issue." "Everything's a transformer issue according to you." Martin almost smiled at that. Almost. He took the coffee and walked toward the front windows. Outside, Belmere glistened under rain and old streetlights. The town used to manufacture railroad equipment decades ago, before most of the factories closed. Now half the brick buildings downtown sat empty, except for storage companies and discount furniture outlets. The electrical infrastructure wasn't much newer than the factories. That was the problem. Nobody replaced things anymore. They patched, delayed, extended, buried problems under paperwork until the next crew inherited them. A pickup truck rolled past, spraying water across the curb. The diner lights flickered again. Shorter this time. Martin looked upward immediately. There it was again. That vibration. Not random. A pattern. Tiny fluctuations spreading through the load. Nora noticed his expression change. "What?" Martin stared at the humming fluorescent lights overhead. "Nothing yet." That answer lingered in the diner long after he said it. By 4:40 a.m., the rain had slowed to mist. Martin drove through the industrial district in his aging utility van, windshield wipers squeaking every few seconds. Coffee cups and tangled extension cords cluttered the passenger seat beside him. Belmere looked different before sunrise. Quieter, more honest somehow. Steam drifted from rooftop vents. Orange security lights reflected across wet pavement. Old transmission towers stretched over the river, like giant rusted skeletons, disappearing into fog. His dispatcher had already left 2 more messages overnight. Apartment outage, overheated panel, streetlight circuit failure. Too many small problems at once. That bothered him more than major outages ever did. Big failures announced themselves clearly, small ones whispered first. Martin pulled over near a fenced transformer station beside an abandoned paper mill. He stepped out into cold mist and listened. Nothing dramatic. No explosions. No visible arcing. Just the steady electrical drone most people stopped hearing years ago. Except tonight, hidden beneath the normal frequencies, came an unstable harmonic tremor. Faint, but there. He walked closer to the chain-link fence. The transformers vibrated unevenly. Load fluctuation. Somewhere upstream in the system, power was being redistributed badly, or manually. Martin frowned. That shouldn't have been possible anymore. Most of the old municipal switching routes had been disconnected after the Ridgeway substation fire back in 2000. His jaw tightened at the thought. He hadn't said his brother's name out loud in years. A pair of headlights swept across the road behind him. Deputy Ellis slowed beside the fence and rolled down his window. "You planning to arrest the transformer?" Ellis asked. Martin stepped back from the fence. "Can't sleep." "That makes 2 of us." Ellis nodded toward the station. "Everything all right?" Martin hesitated. He could already hear the response if he reported it officially. Aging equipment, humidity interference, seasonal demand, same excuses every year. "Probably," he said finally. The deputy studied him a second longer than expected. "You don't sound convinced." Martin looked back toward the transformers humming in the mist. "No," he admitted quietly, "I don't." Around sunrise, Martin finally returned home. His house sat at the edge of town near the rail yard. Small, quiet, half the porch railing still needed repainting. Inside, the kitchen clock blinked 12 o'clock repeatedly. Power interruption. Again. Martin stared at it for several seconds before setting down his keys. The refrigerator motor buzzed unevenly. From somewhere outside came the distant metallic screech of freight cars shifting tracks. He opened the sink cabinet and pulled out an old shoebox filled with faded maintenance notes, grid sketches, and handwritten load diagrams from years ago. Most electricians his age threw old paperwork away. Martin kept everything. He spread the papers across the kitchen table. Dates, transformer routes, substation revisions, emergency bypass maps. Then he stopped. One notation near the bottom of an old schematic made his chest tighten. Backup relay loop, Municipal Sector 7. Decommissioned, or at least it was supposed to be. Martin slowly leaned back in his chair. Outside, morning light crept across the yard. And somewhere far across Belmere, the power flickered again. The hidden load. By noon, the heat had settled over Belmere like a heavy blanket that nobody could kick off. The storm from the night before was gone, but the humidity stayed behind, trapped between brick buildings and sagging power lines. Air conditioners rattled in apartment windows across town, all pulling harder from a grid already stretched thin. Martin sat inside his van, outside the Municipal Records building, engine off, listening to the ticking sound of cooling metal beneath the dashboard. On the passenger seat beside him lay 3 folded grid schematics and a legal pad covered in his handwriting. Sector 7, backup relay loop, still active. It made no sense. Those emergency routes were supposed to be disconnected after the Ridgeway fire. Entire sections of Belmere's old switching infrastructure had been abandoned because maintaining them cost too much. Unless somebody never actually shut them down. Martin rubbed tired fingers against his eyes, or somebody turned them back on. A sudden burst of static crackled from the utility radio clipped near the steering wheel. West District fluctuation confirmed, then silence again. He stared through the windshield at the Records building entrance. People moved slowly in the heat outside, shoulders slumped, coffee cups in hand, trying to survive another workday. Nobody looked like they knew their city was balancing on unstable wiring. Martin stepped out of the van. The pavement radiated heat immediately through his boots. Inside the Records office, old fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. The building smelled faintly of dust, copier toner, and old paper. A ceiling fan turned lazily near the front desk, without accomplishing much. Gloria Kemp looked up from her computer as Martin approached. "Well," she said, adjusting her glasses, "either somebody died, or you finally came to pay your parking tickets." Martin gave a tired half-smile. Need archived utility maps. That bad? Maybe. Gloria had worked municipal records for nearly 30 years. Before that, her husband had spent 2 decades repairing transmission lines with Martin and his brother. She studied his face carefully now. The joking faded first. You seeing something? Martin leaned against the counter slightly. You remember the emergency relay loops after Ridgeway? Her expression tightened immediately. Most people in Belmere didn't mention Ridgeway anymore. Too many funerals connected to it. They shut those down, she said quietly. That's what I thought. You saying they didn't? Martin slid a schematic onto the counter. Sector 7's carrying intermittent load. Gloria stared at the diagram, then looked back at him. That's impossible. Yeah. The ceiling fan clicked overhead. Somewhere deeper inside the building, an air conditioning unit struggled loudly against the heat. Finally, Gloria exhaled slowly and reached beneath the counter for an old keyring. Come on, she said. The archive basement felt 10 degrees cooler than the rest of the building. Metal shelves stretched through dim rows beneath flickering fluorescent tubes. Decades of municipal history sat boxed and forgotten underground. Water pipes rattled softly overhead. Gloria unlocked a storage cage near the back wall. Most of the old utility records got boxed after the merger, she said. Half of it's probably mislabeled. Martin was already scanning faded file tabs. Ridgeway reports, substation revisions, emergency reroute authorizations. His hand slowed, then stopped. There it was. Temporary municipal load redistribution proposal, dated 6 months before the fire. Martin pulled the binder free carefully. Dust drifted into the stale basement air. He opened the cover and saw his brother's handwriting immediately. Small notes scribbled in blue ink along the margins. Load imbalance risk under sustained summer demand. Manual shutdown dependency unresolved. Recommend full replacement within 36 months maximum. Martin stared silently at the page. For a moment, the basement disappeared. He could hear Gabriel's voice again like it was coming through static. Fast talking. Always thinking faster than everyone else in the room. Always sketching diagrams on napkins or receipts or cardboard scraps because his brain never stopped solving problems. Martin swallowed hard. Gloria watched him carefully from across the aisle. That his? She asked softly. Martin nodded once. Neither of them spoke for a while. Then Martin turned another page. Attached near the back was an internal response memo from utility management. Budget constraints acknowledged. Full infrastructure replacement postponed pending future review. Temporary redistribution approved for extended operational use. Extended operational use. Martin felt something cold settle in his chest, despite the basement heat. They stretched the emergency system, year after year. Cheap fixes stacked on older cheap fixes, until nobody remembered where the original danger even started. Except the system remembered. Electrical systems always remembered. Jesus, Gloria whispered. Martin kept reading. And then he found the final page. Incident report summary, Ridgeway substation fire. Cause listed. Operator judgment failure during emergency rerouting procedure. Martin stared at the sentence until the letters blurred slightly. His jaw tightened, because he knew that wording. Carefully designed, just vague enough to bury responsibility. Gloria saw his expression change. What is it? Martin handed her the page silently. She read it once, then again slower. Oh, Marty. He warned them. His voice sounded distant now. He told them this setup wouldn't survive long-term demand. Gloria looked back toward him carefully. You didn't know? Martin laughed once under his breath. Not humor, just exhaustion. They told everybody Gabe overloaded the relay manually, said he panicked during the surge. But this says, I know what it says. He closed the binder harder than intended. The sound echoed sharply through the basement. Above them, the lights flickered. Both of them looked upward instantly. The fluorescent tubes buzzed unevenly, then steadied again. Martin checked his watch automatically. Peak afternoon demand was starting earlier than usual. Too much strain already. His radio crackled suddenly from his belt. Unit 12 respond to Halston District transformer overheating. Static swallowed the rest. Then another voice cut in over the interference. Downtown hospital reporting voltage instability. Martin's stomach tightened immediately. Sophia's hospital. He grabbed the radio. Repeat that. But only static answered. The hospital parking garage smelled like hot concrete and exhaust fumes. Martin found Sophia outside near the ambulance entrance, smoking a cigarette she clearly wasn't supposed to have. dark circles beneath her eyes, hair tied back carelessly. "You look terrible," she said as he approached. "Good to see you too." She handed him a bottled water from the cooler beside the wall. "You here because of the outages? You having them?" "Backup generators kicked twice this morning. That got his attention. Hospitals almost never switched, unless voltage instability crossed dangerous thresholds." Sophia watched him carefully now. "You know something you're not saying." Martin leaned against the wall beside her. Ambulance sirens echoed faintly somewhere downtown. "I'm working on it." "That's not an answer." "No," he admitted, "it's not." For a second, neither of them spoke. Their relationship had spent years stuck inside unfinished conversations. Too much grief, too much silence, too many avoided phone calls after Sophia's mother died. Finally, Sophia looked out toward the city streets. "The ER's full of heatstroke cases already," she said quietly. "If the power goes out for real..." She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. Martin followed her gaze toward the skyline. Far in the distance, beyond rooftops and transmission towers, a dark column of smoke suddenly rose into the afternoon sky. Not large, but growing. His utility radio exploded with overlapping voices. "Industrial district transformer failure confirmed. Traffic systems offline. Fire crews responding." Then came the phrase that made his pulse slow instead of quicken. The phrase every experienced electrician feared hearing. "Cascade instability possible." Martin looked toward the smoke rising above Belmere. The system wasn't stabilizing anymore. It was starting to feed on itself. The man inside the grid. The first rolling blackout hit just after sunset. 1 block lost power, then 3, then half the industrial district disappeared into darkness. From the ridge overlooking Belmere, the city looked like a giant circuit board, with pieces blinking out one section at a time. Martin stood beside his van near the central switching facility and watched entire neighborhoods fade into shadow. The heat hadn't broken. Even after dark, warm air hung over the city like a blanket pulled too tight. Emergency sirens drifted through the distance. Backup generators growled behind hospitals, grocery stores, and apartment complexes. Every few seconds, his radio crackled with overlapping voices. Transformer failure, voltage instability, emergency load transfers. None of it sounded organized anymore. The system was slipping, and everyone working it knew it. Martin looked toward the massive concrete structure ahead of him, the central switching facility, the heart of Belmere's electrical network, 40 years old, partially modernized, never fully replaced, exactly the kind of infrastructure people stopped thinking about until it failed. Floodlights illuminated the building's outer walls. Utility trucks crowded the parking area. Workers moved between equipment sheds carrying tools and portable diagnostic units. Nobody looked calm. Inside, the control room felt 10 degrees hotter than outside. Large display screens covered one wall, showing load distributions across the city. Red warning indicators flashed continuously. Operators spoke into radios without taking their eyes off the monitors. A younger engineer pointed toward a graph that looked more like a mountain range than a stable power curve. "Sector 4 is climbing again. Transfer load. We already did." "Then transfer more." "We can't." The conversation ended there, because everyone knew the truth. There wasn't anywhere left to transfer it. Martin stepped toward the main console. Several people recognized him immediately, not because of rank, not because of authority, because when old systems started behaving strangely, experienced field workers developed reputations, and Martin had spent decades listening to electrical infrastructure the way mechanics listen to engines. The senior operations supervisor, Dana Brooks, approached him quickly. She looked exhausted. Sweat darkened the collar of her uniform shirt. "You were right." Martin didn't answer. There wasn't much point. Dana handed him a tablet displaying live grid data. The instability's spreading faster than expected. Martin studied the readings. The numbers confirmed what he already suspected. The temporary relay network was failing, and worse, the automated shutdown systems weren't responding correctly. He looked up. "Why?" Dana hesitated, then handed him another report, a maintenance inspection from 3 years earlier. Deferred upgrades, deferred replacements, deferred software synchronization. Deferred. Deferred. Martin almost laughed, not because it was funny, because every disaster eventually became a collection of postponed decisions. Nobody chooses catastrophe all at once. They choose delay, again and again, until one day the bill arrives. A loud alarm suddenly echoed through the room. Every conversation stopped. An operator pointed toward the display wall. Central North Substation overload. Another voice followed. Emergency threshold exceeded. The room became very quiet. Not silent, just focused. Everyone understood the stakes now. If Central North failed, overload would cascade into neighboring sectors, one station after another, like falling dominoes. Dana looked at Martin. What options do we have? Martin stared at the map, then toward a section highlighted in red. A section connected to the old emergency relay loops, the same loops his brother had designed. The same loops management had stretched far beyond their intended lifespan. And suddenly he understood something. Not a new technical solution, a missing piece. Get me the original relay architecture. Dana frowned. We already have current schematics. Not current. His voice stayed calm. Original. Minutes later, yellowed engineering diagrams covered a conference table. Martin spread them carefully beneath the fluorescent lights. His eyes moved across old handwritten notes. Most belonged to Gabriel. Tiny calculations, emergency procedures, load balancing instructions, and then he saw it, a handwritten notation in the corner. Temporary stabilization route requires manual sectional isolation. Not automated, manual. Martin stared at the note, then read it again. For 26 years, everyone had focused on the rerouting system itself. Nobody had asked how it was supposed to be shut down safely. The answer had been sitting there all along. His brother hadn't designed an automatic solution. He'd designed a human one, because during emergencies, computers only followed instructions. Experienced operators adapted. Martin looked up. The system isn't broken. Dana blinked. What? It's doing exactly what it was designed to do. He pointed toward the schematic. The problem is nobody's operating it the way Gabe intended. Understanding slowly spread across her face. You think manual isolation can stop the cascade? I know it can. Can? Martin paused. The harder truth came next. It has to happen inside the relay network. The room fell still. Everyone knew what that meant. The underground switching tunnels. The oldest part of the facility. Partially flooded. Poorly ventilated. Still energized. Dangerous under normal circumstances. Far worse now. Dana folded her arms. Who can do it? Martin looked back at the diagram, then at the blinking overload indicators, then at the tunnel access map. There weren't many people left who understood these systems firsthand. And fewer who trusted themselves inside them. I can. Outside, rain finally began falling. Not a storm, just steady rain cooling the overheated city. Martin sat on the tailgate of a utility truck, pulling on insulated gloves. Across the parking lot, emergency crews moved through pools of reflected light. Everything smelled like wet asphalt and ozone. His shoulder ached. His knees hurt. His hands weren't as steady as they used to be. Age had a way of introducing itself during moments like this. A familiar voice interrupted his thoughts. You always pick terrible nights to be stubborn. Sophia. Martin looked up. She stood beneath the rain holding a small equipment bag, hospital scrubs, exhausted eyes, same determined expression she'd inherited from her mother. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Sophia handed him a fresh pair of work gloves. You forgot these. Martin accepted them quietly. Rain tapped against the truck bed. You shouldn't be here. Probably not. A faint smile appeared, then disappeared. Sophia looked toward the facility entrance. You coming back out? The question carried more weight than either acknowledged. Martin answered honestly, I plan to. She nodded once, then surprised him. She reached forward and squeezed his shoulder briefly. No dramatic speech, no emotional breakthrough, just a simple gesture. A daughter reminding her father that someone was waiting. Martin swallowed hard. Tell the hospital to prepare for stabilization. You sure? No. He smiled faintly, but I'm hopeful. The tunnels were louder than he remembered. Water dripped from overhead pipes. Electrical equipment hummed through concrete walls. Emergency lights cast long shadows across narrow corridors. Martin moved carefully through the maze carrying a flashlight and relay diagrams. One switch at a time. One section at a time. Manual isolation. Exactly the way Gabriel intended. Hours passed. The city above waited. Hospitals waited. Families waited. Workers waited. And slowly, the load curve began to change. Control room operators reported stabilization, then improvement, then recovery. Neighborhoods returned one by one. Streetlights, traffic signals, apartment buildings. Entire sections of Belmere breathed back to life. By dawn, the cascade had stopped. The city remained standing. 3 weeks later, Martin sat inside Nora's diner, watching utility crews replace transmission hardware across the street. Morning sunlight reflected from fresh equipment. Coffee steamed from his mug. The diner buzzed with ordinary conversation, normal life, the kind people rarely appreciated until it almost vanished. Across from him sat Sophia, finishing breakfast before another hospital shift. Outside, workers installed infrastructure that should have been replaced years earlier. This time, nobody was postponing it. Sophia glanced toward the window. "You think people know how close it got?" Martin considered the question, then shook his head. "Most don't. Does that bother you?" He looked outside again, at the crews, at the power lines, at the city waking up beneath a stable electrical grid. No, and he meant it. For years he'd carried his brother's memory like unfinished business, like a debt. Now it felt different. Not erased, not forgotten, just understood. The diner lights flickered once, briefly, workers testing equipment outside. Martin instinctively looked upward. Old habit. Then the current stabilized. The hum settled. Steady, reliable, normal. For the first time in decades, he didn't keep listening. He simply took a sip of coffee and let the sound go. What remained after the lights? 3 months later, Belmere looked almost the same. That was the strange thing about disasters that never fully happened. Most people moved on. The coffee shops reopened, traffic lights worked, factory shifts resumed, kids rode bicycles beneath power lines without giving them a second thought. Life continued. From the outside, it was difficult to see how close the city had come to unraveling. But Martin could see it everywhere. Not in the damage, in the repairs. Every morning on his way to work, he passed utility crews replacing equipment that should have been replaced 20 years earlier. New transformers, new switching systems, new monitoring hardware, fresh concrete pads where rusted equipment once stood. The work wasn't glamorous. Most residents barely noticed. Yet every replacement felt like a quiet promise being kept, a promise the city had postponed for decades. One cool September morning, Martin parked near the river and watched a crane lift a transformer into place at the old Ridgeway site. The original substation had been demolished years ago. Only fragments remained. Concrete foundations, a few rusted fence posts. Memories. The new facility looked different. Smaller, smarter, safer. A young engineer walked across the construction site carrying blueprints. Martin recognized him. Tyler Jensen, one of the engineers who had dismissed Martin's concerns months earlier. Tyler noticed him standing by the fence. For a second he seemed uncertain whether to approach. Then he did. "Morning," Martin nodded. "Morning." Tyler looked toward the construction work. The crane operator carefully lowered the transformer into position. Workers guided it with ropes. Everything moved slowly, deliberately. "Never thanked you," Tyler said. Martin shrugged. "You don't owe me anything." Tyler laughed softly. "Maybe not." For a moment neither spoke. The river moved quietly behind them. Early sunlight reflected from the water. Finally, Tyler looked toward the new station. "We've been reviewing the old records." Martin already knew where the conversation was heading. "The reports?" Tyler nodded. "All of them." A pause. "Your brother was right." Martin stared at the construction site. The words landed differently than he expected. For years he had imagined hearing them. From supervisors, executives, investigators, someone, anyone. Now that they had finally arrived, they felt oddly small. Not because they weren't true, because they came too late. Gabriel wasn't here to hear them. Still, some truths mattered even when delayed. "Yeah," Martin said quietly. "He usually was." Tyler smiled, then looked back toward the workers. "We named the new emergency protocol after him." Martin blinked. "What?" "The Gabriel Velez manual isolation procedure." For several seconds, Martin simply stared. The engineer seemed almost embarrassed. A faint laugh escaped him. "Didn't think you'd care." Martin looked away toward the river, because suddenly he couldn't trust his expression. Not after all these years, not after carrying that weight for so long. The crane's hydraulic systems hissed in the distance. A welding torch sparked briefly. Life moved forward. Yet something inside him finally settled. Not dramatically, just enough. "Thank you," he said. Tyler nodded once, then returned to work, leaving Martin alone beside the fence. That evening, Sophia invited him to dinner. A simple thing, but it still felt unusual. For years, their conversations had been limited to rushed phone calls and holiday obligations. Now they happened naturally, without effort, without resentment. The restaurant overlooked the river. Nothing expensive, just good food and open windows, the kind of place people visited after long shifts. Sophia arrived straight from the hospital, tired as always, yet lighter somehow, less guarded. They ordered dinner, talked about ordinary things, patients, weather, construction delays, topics that once would have been interrupted by uncomfortable silence. Halfway through the meal, Sophia set down her fork. "I found something." Martin raised an eyebrow. "What?" She reached into her bag and placed an old photograph on the table. The edges were worn, the colors faded. Martin stared. It showed two young men, standing beside a utility truck, both covered in dirt, both laughing. One was him, the other was Gabriel. The photo couldn't have been more than 30 years old. For a moment, the restaurant disappeared. The conversations, the music, the clatter of dishes, all gone. Only the photograph remained. Sophia smiled softly. "Found it in Mom's old storage boxes." Martin carefully picked it up. His brother's grin looked exactly the way he remembered. Confident, annoying, impossible to discourage. A man who believed every problem had a solution somewhere, even if it took all night to find it. Martin laughed quietly. The sound surprised both of them. "What?" Sophia asked. "He'd hate being a protocol." "What do you mean?" "He liked breaking rules." That made her laugh too. For a few minutes they traded stories, some she had never heard before. Stories Martin had spent years avoiding because they hurt too much. Now they felt different, still painful, but no longer unbearable. The memories belonged to something larger than grief. They belonged to a life, a real one. A week later, Belmere held a public meeting regarding infrastructure improvements. The town hall filled with residents, business owners, utility workers, and local officials. Most people came because they wanted answers. Others came because they simply wanted to understand what had happened. Martin sat near the back, as usual, far from microphones, far from attention. The mayor spoke first, then engineers, then utility representatives. Charts appeared, budgets were discussed, future upgrades were announced. Necessary conversations, important conversations. Yet Martin found himself watching the workers seated throughout the room instead. Linemen, operators, technicians, dispatchers, people whose names would never appear in headlines, people who showed up during storms, during outages, during emergencies, the ones who climbed poles in freezing rain and crawled into tunnels when everyone else ran away. The meeting ended after nearly 2 hours. Residents filed toward the exits. Chairs scraped against the floor. Conversations filled the room. Martin stood to leave. Before he reached the door, an older woman stopped him. Someone he didn't recognize. She hesitated, then smiled. "My husband was on oxygen during the blackout." Martin listened quietly. She looked down briefly. "Whatever happened that night." Her voice caught for a second. "Thank you." Nothing more. No speeches, no crowd, no applause. Just gratitude. Simple, honest, human. Martin nodded. The woman left. The room slowly emptied. Evening sunlight stretched across Belmere's streets. Traffic moved normally. Storefronts glowed. Streetlights waited for dusk. The city carried on, exactly as cities should. Martin stood on the courthouse steps for a moment, before heading toward his truck. The lights would eventually fail again somewhere. Equipment would age. Storms would come. Problems never disappeared permanently. That wasn't how the world worked. But now the city was listening, preparing, paying attention, and somehow that felt enough. He climbed into the driver's seat, started the engine, and drove home beneath power lines humming steadily against the darkening sky.